Hello everyone. Things are a little different here. We're not looking at a demo. We are actually just looking at whitelist.tf, which is a resource that shows the whitelists. And I was kind of intending on making this video regardless, but turns out when I have coffee, I end up recording more videos than I expected going into it. So we're just going to talk about the whitelist, talk about what weapons are banned and why. And hopefully this will be a little informative because, again, I do see some misconceptions that these quote-unquote off-meta strategies that sort of disrupt the 2-soldier, 2-scout, medic, demo class lineup, strategies that are too good and disrupt that end up getting banned in order to maintain that, which I don't think is true. There's some merit to that, which we'll get into in a moment. But I'm just going to talk about all the class restrictions, my opinion on them, why they might be banned, and whatnot. So these are all the restrictions. First thing you'll notice is most of the whitelists are actually on taunts, mainly because taunts that you can cancel at any time. Since taunts put you in third person, they just let you look around corners. And we don't like to play with that. Usually there is some. Now, certain taunts are enabled, and one actually that really stands out is the director's vision, which is unique in the fact that not only it's still a taunt and lets you look around a corner, but there is no audio cue to it. So it does actually have an interesting little niche as the only taunt that allows you to look around corners without giving away anything with any voice lines or whatnot, or any sound cues. But of course, the taunts that do not, generally the looping, the non-looping ones, the ones that you can't cancel whenever you want, the ones you have to commit to, those tend to not be banned because, yeah, there's actual commitment to that. Okay. And then another thing you'll notice, well, let's just get into things here. So for starters, big thing you'll notice, Scout has a lot of banned weapons, and actually the most banned weapons out of any class, which to some might seem surprising because, of course, Scout is a meta 6s class, and that might seem counterintuitive if you have this misconception that bans are to uphold the meta. Why would it be holding back Scout so much? And that is because Scout is just simply a very broken class in 6s. And we don't want it to be more broken, honestly, and people do love to complain about Scout. So, to be fair, a lot of these weapons I do think could be unbanned, potentially, but we'll get to that in a case-by-case basis. And again, I do want to reiterate, I do talk about this in my How to Make a Metagame video, but the philosophy behind weapon bans, they follow different schools of thought, where if we can even load up something like TF2, you'll notice immediately that there are more weapon bans, like Gas Passers banned. I didn't even know it was banned. Detonator, Scorch Shot are banned. Quickies are banned. Lock is banned. So, Europe in general are more, they like to abuse unlocks more, versus North America tend to just kind of play with whatever, even if there is an unlock that might be broken that's kind of getting slept on, like, in my opinion, the battalion's backup. But they're also just generally more whitelist pure than in North America. They, as a community, tend to lean more in the school of thought that if a weapon is just kind of annoying and doesn't really contribute much to the game, and not even in a broken sense, like there's still counterplay, it's not overpowered or anything, but just a nuisance and doesn't really make the game more interesting or fun, then why include it? Versus other schools of thought are more in the line of, if it isn't actively harming the meta and things are still balanced, then it's fine to include things, and generally it's better to include things than not, versus, of course, to reiterate, the other school of thought, which leans more in the, it needs to contribute something positively in order to warrant inclusion, and that being included in the game is more of a privilege than a right, I should say. So where you fall along that is really up to you. Of course, there is very little community consensus. You know, every single one of these weapons, you can find advocates who want them unbanned, honestly. And there are many weapons here that are allowed that people would want banned. So it is very much an in-community discussion that, you know, you have different opinions all over. But generally, at least for North America here, this is showing the general consensus of what is deemed bannable and not, because, you know, all these decisions are by community vote, generally speaking. So with that in mind, let us get started with the Scout. And we're starting with Soda Popper. So Soda Popper is interesting. And I actually had an entire discussion with a friend last night about all these weapons. And he was generally pretty on the fence about a lot of these and didn't really deem them as that strong necessarily. And Soda Popper might kind of be there with me. So on one hand, Soda Popper is much burstier than Scattergun. You can output more damage faster for those first two shots. And the jumping capability after you've built up the charge, the hype, is really strong. So it can be used to kind of win fights in a 1v1 kind of setting. And it can be used to just get places that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get to. But that's kind of it. So generally speaking, the Scattergun is a much more consistent combat tool. So I'd imagine a lot of pocket scouts would still prefer the Scattergun, honestly, just because having 6 shots is really nice. And if you miss, you know, either of your Soda Popper shots, or at least like only chip someone for however much, then yeah, you just don't have that prolonged reliability that the Scattergun has. And in some sense, I don't know if it would even be that strong. Now, that being said, of course, like the height meter and just the potential of a Scattergun bursting down a 200 health target faster than a Scattergun could is a scary prospect for Scout, which is already just such a broken class in the format. But yeah, that's kind of where the Soda Popper stands. Not, you know, unanimously decided as something broken, but at the time, or at the moment rather, considered kind of problematic. Now on to Bonk. So Bonk is pretty interesting because I think this was a weapon that was changed in order to have the slowness effect if you take damage during the bonk itself, which those slow effects like don't really exist that much because you can just kind of spam strafe keys and it gets canceled out, which is weird. But why is the bonk banned? Well, the bonk, now you can go behind for free with the bonk, but that's not really the problematic aspect of it, because of course if you take any damage you're going to be very slow, and even though you can kind of outmaneuver that slowness, your odds of winning a fight, if you're forced to, because of course this is going to be something that if you're trying to go behind with the bonk, it would likely be on the flank, for instance. That's a fight that you're likely going to lose because you can just get chased down. You can't shoot back until the bonk is over, and then you just lose that fight and die. So it's not really a useful tool for going behind. But in the case of pressuring into last, a new metagame development that we see now is a sap in sack, where a spy will sap a gun while a soldier sacks in, because of course the gun on last is such a crucial piece of the last hold, and a lot of the time the positioning of medics are actually pretty close to the doors in order to adequately heal and support the players holding the doors. And the linchpin that all this relies on is the fact that the gun is watching a lot of area and space and ready to physically deny any bombers by knocking them away, just locking onto them with the automatic aim of the sentry gun. But if the gun is down, suddenly the medic is a lot more vulnerable to these bombs because he's so close to these doorways. So sapping the gun in order for it to not be able to deny a bomb and then bombing in is a really powerful strategy that we have seen as a new shift in the meta. And Bonk functions kind of similarly to this, where you just kind of get to have a gun only shoot at you. But it's a little stronger as well, because for a spy play, you are basically guaranteed to lose a player. Like, your spy is going to die. And that's for like a strictly temporary sap that an engineer can just get off in 2 wrenches, right? So not only can Bonk distract a sentry gun in last for much longer, which enables a lot more to happen, but also the scout could potentially even survive as well. And that's just, it's kind of broken into last, basically. It doesn't really, it doesn't make holding or pushing that much more interesting. It's just kind of an unlock that enables this kind of strategy that would be, particularly strong. And again, it's on scout as well, which is a broken class that people like to keep in check. Critical is an interesting case because I don't think it's that good of a weapon necessarily. I don't think you'd be like using it to take flank fights necessarily. Because again, I mean, just 1v1s in general are kind of coin flippy. And I believe it has you take mini crits before you fire your first shot, right? Yeah, just overall. That being said, critical at Ubers are a legitimate concern because, a scout could literally just use it before popping around a doorway. You can be, and oftentimes before you take an Uber, you're like buffing a soldier or something anyway, and the scout has time to do this. And it just gives you free damage in an Uber without any real downside. And again, mini crits have no fall off as well, so it really increases the range a lot. Just makes Ubers a little less balanced and a little less interesting, honestly, because again, you are just incentivized to equip this weapon to be better in this situation, which generally Sixes players don't really like the idea of, well, you have to use this weapon in this situation because it's just better. Generally, we tend to like, I don't know, a little more diversity, I guess. Because keep in mind, again, if a weapon is just better, it's just going to become the meta, right? So it's more about asking the questions of which of these weapons are more interesting and best to be just the meta options. So critical I don't think is like particularly strong or anything like that, but I will say critical at Ubers are a little bit dumb. Whether it's banned or not, I don't know. Don't really care that much, but for now it's banned, and I think that's probably fine. Guillotine I do think is a really, really strong weapon because it does do a ton of damage. So not only does it do initial damage, which is really strong, but on top of that, it does bleed as well. And even the Rap Assassin, which does far less damage, and something else to note is charges way slower, is a contentious unlock that people don't like in North America, and I think it's already banned in Europe. And the reason for that is just, again, Scout is such a broken class. Why are, like, people don't want Scout to have just a spam option, right? And that is what the Guillotine is. It charges really, really quickly. So for all the complaints about the lock and load or Rap Assassin or any of just the kind of random spammy long range damage, Guillotine is, but maybe even worse, while also being on the best class in Sixes, or the best combat class in Sixes. So it just kind of gives brainless spam to Scout. Arguably, the format would be a lot less fun if Scouts were just throwing guillotines all the time. Because again, if guillotine were allowed, then it's not like the game mode would be any more diverse or anything. It's just all the Scouts that are on pistol or winger just switch to guillotine, and then the game is just spammier, spammier from Scouts, mind you, and generally kind of more annoying without much positive upside, because there isn't a strong upside for Scouts having the guillotine outside of you get to say that one fewer weapon is unbanned and Scouts have another toy to play with, I guess. Mad Milk is banned, and this is a super righteous ban, and I think Mad Milk is a fantastic example actually of why I think that trying to balance weapons between casual and competitive is a fool's errand and doesn't really even need to happen, because there is no way in order to make Mad Milk acceptable in Sixes or not broken in Sixes without completely gutting how it functions. And in casual, it's totally fine. It's not really a problematic weapon. So why would you gut a weapon that Scouts enjoy using in casual just to make it something completely different that you could or could not use in sixes, which again, it would either be worse than the pistol or winger, or, you know, you could find a fine line where it's comparable to them and actually sees use, but it typically is either worse and just never gets used, or is better and then just completely replaces them, right? Because again, it's not that people are forced to use these weapons or whatnot. It's just that what is best is usually what gets used, and yeah, that's just kind of how it goes. So Mad Milk, what is broken about it? Well, on top of the fact that it just gives healing, it basically forces scouts to use it, because suddenly all the nuances that go into team fights and who wins team fights, such as positioning, decision-making, coordination, individual skill, and individual playmaking, all that ceases to matter as much, because whichever scout gets a better milk on the other team gives their team a massive advantage, because again, just healing players off of hitting them just enables you to kind of walk at people and out heal their damage, because you're, you know, outputting comparable damage to them. But of course they're going to die first because you are healing off some of it. So it would be very centralizing. And again, to reiterate, on a class that's already very broken in sixes, that being Scout, yeah, it would just completely throw things on its head and get rid of a lot of the nuance that goes into team fights, and kind of just bring the game down to some level about just, okay, well, who threw the better milk? Next is the Pretty Boys Pocket Pistol. Now, honestly, I'm not too sure why this thing is banned. I think it might just be that it gives you health on Scout and it shoots faster. So it is a better pistol, generally speaking. It does have a smaller clip size, and the clip size is nice on pistol, because pistol is kind of inconsistent. And it's nice to have those extra couple shots, because generally you're only using the pistol for either long range spam to try and destroy crit heals on like a mid fight or something, or to finish someone off who's like less than 20 HP. Those are the main uses for the pistol. I suppose finish someone off, you know, if they're less than however much HP, if you don't have scattergun shots loaded as well. And the extra clip size is quite nice. Generally speaking, like, scouts use stock or winger pretty split, and it's a matter of personal preference and map as well, because of course winger enables certain jumps on certain maps that some scouts might prefer over others. So yeah, the pocket pistol I think would be generally considered better than stock. It is banned because, again, people don't want to give Scout an unlock that just gives him health in 1v1s that also fires faster, so that could equate to more DPS. But I don't think it's particularly problematic. People just, again, don't want Scout to be more broken than he already is. So that's it for Scout. Let's move on to Soldier. So starting off with the Cow Mangler, and this is one of the most contentious weapon bans because a lot of people do want it unbanned. I do not, and there's one big problem point for it, which is the charge shot. So for starters, what makes the Cow Mangler really cool is the fact that it doesn't require ammo. That's actually the primary reason people like it, which has some benefits. So the game would inherently be a little more spammy because soldiers aren't required to take into consideration their ammo. Usually at a higher level, this is going to matter less because, you know, good soldiers are already used to playing around ammo packs and spamming effectively with their ammo in mind. But without that consideration, soldiers are going to be able to spam a bit more. And also, ammo packs are going to be more available to demos. So demos are going to be able to spam a little bit more. So in stalemate kind of situations, even disad type of situations, just situations in which you're looking at long range spam or just spam in general, Cow Mangler does enable a little bit more spam, which for some people, they don't like the fact that the skill of maintaining ammo and playing around ammo is erased by the Cow Mangler. And that's a problem point that some people have with it. That is also an attractive factor for a lot of people, the fact that it enables you that. So the other thing about the Mangler is the charge shot. And this is what most people dislike about the weapon, is the charge shot, because again, it's just it's really lethal long range spam. kind of lethal spam. So a similar case to why people aren't a huge fan of the lock, why the Guillotine is banned, is a primary reason why the Cow Mangler is banned. Because of course the charge shot has downsides. You use all your ammo doing so, so you have to be at least somewhat intelligent about it. But also, you can be perfectly safe just ripping off charge shots, and you won't be punished for it. And if one of those charge shots, the big thing about the charge shot is the fact that if you direct hit a medic, the mini crit charge shot, in addition to the afterburn, will kill that medic unless they get a health pack before the afterburn fully ticks. And that sucks. There's already a problem in sixes of, I'll say like medic is one of the least popular classes, just because for a multitude of reasons, but one of them being just like killing things, and playing combat classes is really fun. But there's of course plenty of reward and interest to playing medic as a supporting role, being able to like hit clutch bows, heal teammates, be the backbone of the team, the primary, backbone of Ubers as well. Like there's a lot of reward to be had in medic, but some of the arguments against Cow Mangler and other weapons like this is that it just makes medic less fun to play. And I think it's a good idea to make medic fun to play, right? And actually, curiously enough, one weapon that people have considered banning, not seriously, but you have your Giga Boomers that talk about banning the crossbow, because it did, in some sense, erase a major skill in sixes, or a major factor of sixes, which is the fact that in the past, you used to kind of be able to push off of the fact that you dealt a lot of damage in a fight, like in a previous fight. So you might have dealt a lot of damage on mid and been able to push two off the fact that the other team just can't heal fast enough. And the crossbow completely eliminates that. And the crossbow can just save players who probably were playing out of position and should have been dying just because their medic saved them with a bow. So it does, in some sense, eliminate some of the impact that damage has. And people did legitimately think that, there's something to be said about the fact that damage should stick a little bit more, and the crossbow gets rid of that. But basically the big counterpoint and why everyone's like, no, of course we're not banning this thing, is it actually makes medic way more interesting to play and way more fun to play. So the fun of medic is something that is taken into consideration, because again, medic is something that you're always going to have a medic no matter what. It's the best class in the game. And when medic might not be as fun to play, for not really any other benefit than, having soldiers have a new toy or whatever, that is something to take into account. So the charge shot is kind of brainless spam, and brainless spam that particularly messes with medics. And for that reason, a lot of people just prefer to play without it. Now we go on to the disciplinary action, which I am really curious about, because the main reason for this unlock being banned, and actually the main reason for the gloves of running urgently and the buffalo steak sandwich being banned in the past, they no longer are, is because of the idea of heavy to mid. So heavy, of course, is a bad class to be running all the time, because heavy suffers immensely as far as mobility goes, has a lot of health, but really, really gets ruined and destroyed in open team fights where there's actual range to consider, because you just eat spam and suddenly you are the only target of heals. Your medic just has to tank the crap out of you, otherwise you die, and you're not outputting a lot of damage in return unless the other team just decides to walk at you for some reason. So one case, however, you could make is that a heavy to mid could be strong, in the sense that, first and foremost, if you use any of these tools, such as disciplinary action or steak sandwich or gloves of running urgently or anything to get the heavy to mid on time, then suddenly you just have this wall that should just win you the mid, right? I don't actually think this is the case. I think that in the modern metagame, heavy to mid is not really good. I think you just get spammed out and lose. And also, even if you win the mid, then what? You're just stuck with a heavy, and how do you push into two with a heavy? So I don't think heavy to mid is actually something worth considering. So it's kind of a shame that the disciplinary action is banned, because this is a really interesting unlock, I think. Soldiers already are considered a bit of a weak class in 6s, insofar as they just get kind of hard countered by scouts. But this enables really a lot more soldier aggression, more bombing options for soldiers, and we might see more aggression and fluidity in the format. On top of the fact that soldier has really strong melee unlocks anyway in the escape plan and market gardener, and pain train for that matter. So it's not even necessarily a foregone conclusion that this would be used all the time. It might carve itself a nice little niche. It'd be a cool weapon to see included. But it's kind of just a grandfathered in ban. I haven't seen discussion about this weapon for a very long time. People are just kind of used to playing without it and haven't thought about it for a while, because of course, that heavy to mid boogeyman. But yeah. So Pyro, 0 weapons banned, because the class is just bad. Sorry. Well, not bad. It has uniqueness and very interesting utility, but those niches are pretty small, so you don't see Pyro for very long periods of time. It's usually just disadd last holds, which it can absolutely excel at. Demo has 0 weapons banned. Well, actually, while we're on the topic of a soldier, I should talk about these secondaries. So base jumper. Base jumper is like the pain point for a lot of casual players who accuse 6s of ruining casual or whatever by getting these weapons changed, which I'll try to sympathize with. I don't want to be dismissive necessarily. In my opinion, base jumper functions pretty similarly how it did before, honestly. I know you can't redeploy it, but it's still banned, right? So it got changed. It's still banned. Why is it still banned? Well, base jumper is really strong for a few reasons. So for starters, just being able to kind of sit in the skybox as a soldier is extremely powerful, because you kind of can't be touched from up there. And actually, curiously enough, there was a recent tournament played, a cup, in which they tested weapons. So the Cow Mangler, the base jumper, Criticola, Bonk, Soda Popper were all allowed and tested, and people played with them. So again, people are testing these weapons, and you know, it's not that people aren't trying to change the meta and they want to just keep it the same. Like there's legitimate testing towards these weapons, and the general opinion I got about base jumper is, yeah, it's just broken, because the dynamic of a soldier 1v1 against other soldiers or against scouts is like the soldier is going to be jumping around usually, but they have to hit the ground at some point. So against explosive classes like Demo or another soldier, you're generally trying to hit them as they're landing. And the base jumper lets you kind of hover and then just win the fight, because it's very difficult to understate the value of high ground in TF2 and being above your opponent, especially as soldier, a class with like reliable splash like that, just wins you fights. So being able to just kind of deploy this thing when you're hovering over someone and then just win the fight instantly is really powerful. In addition to the fact that like one such example I saw from a friend of mine who played in this cup is he bombed a medic, right? And this medic's like trying to jump around, trying to time the rocket, just all the normal defensive movement counterplay stuff you try and do when you're getting bombed. Try and time when they're firing that rocket in order to surf it away to safety. And then, of course, you know, from the offensive perspective there's, again, considerations you have to make. Do we try and, like, you of course want to headshot rocket the medic so that he can't surf it, as in you just knock him instantly into the ground and secure that kill. And you might delay when you shoot a rocket so that the med jumps and tries to surf, but the rocket never comes out, and then you can shoot him when he lands so he can't surf it or whatever. So there's actual like play and counterplay and nuance to this. With the base jumper, you literally just deploy it, you hover over this med, there's literally not a single thing you can do to live, and it's just a free kill. And that kind of erases a lot of the interest and skill in an interaction like that, and other interactions as well. It's just extremely powerful for soldier. And yeah, people just kind of don't want to play with it as much as a result. Generally makes the game a little less interesting. While also, to be clear, base jumper would make teams rely more on scouts, because a soldier in the air like that is only reliable to take out with hit scan. So that would be a scout or a sniper, just in case there was any worry about that. And we should talk about the reserve shooter as well. Reserve shooter just kind of makes bombing impossible, or at least hard punishes bombing. And bombing is a really important aspect of the game. Bombing is what opens up opportunities. It's what creates space. It's what secures kills in team fights. Active soldier play is the first aggressive asset a team has. That is those are the frontline stormtroopers of an attack, are soldier bombs. And being able to just kind of sit on whatever point you're on and then just mini crit deny them, because again, physically denying the soldier is how you deny the bombs, and the more damage you do, the more knockback you do. And mini crits don't have fall off, so you can kind of just shotgun deny soldiers from any range, and then bombing is just not really that good anymore. So as a result, reserve shooter would just incentivize extremely passive turtley play, and people don't really like playing with that, so they would much prefer playing with gunboat soldiers. So reserve shooter is not allowed. So again, in some of these cases, it is literally decisions about we would rather this be the meta. So there is some there is some merit to claiming that a certain weapon should be, or what am I even trying to articulate here? There is some merit to the idea that certain weapons are banned in order to maintain a specific meta. Because whether a weapon is included or not, in some cases, is a decision about, would we rather this be the weapon everyone uses or this be the weapon that everyone uses, which is a decision you're going to have to make. And if one weapon is just less fun and less interesting and has less depth and nuance to it, then it might be worthwhile playing with the other thing, right? Okay, that's it for soldier. Pyro, of course, nothing banned. Demo, nothing banned except base jumper, but it's banned because of soldier. Although base jumper demo, I don't know if it'd be good. It honestly might be, but who cares? Okay, on to heavy. Natasha is banned. So Natasha just makes last much easier to hold. Because not only the slowing effect is going to make you a lot more effective against close range targets and just shred them a lot easier, despite the fact you have a damage penalty, but also the resistance is really, really good. It's one of the primary reasons why I think the Brass Beast is so good in sixes. But yeah, this is just a chunky defensive weapon on a class that's already a chunky defensive option on last, and people are happy with the balance of things. Heavies are very powerful on last, but they're not impossible to overcome. And I honestly, I think I could admit that I think a fair amount of the reason Natasha is banned is just because of the slowing effect. It's just annoying to play against. That's probably a contributing factor to it. I don't think Natasha would be particularly broken, but it's banned. People prefer not to play with it, I suppose. Fist of Steel, I don't even know why it's banned. Obviously, you take way less damage. So it's going to be a lot harder to kill a heavy, of course. But I don't see how it's broken, to be honest, because you have to have it out. So the only thing I could really realistically think it would affect sixes is that it'd be easier for a heavy to live, as in, a heavy's playing on the spawn door as an Uber's getting taken, and they're going to retreat to the spawn because you obviously don't want to die on the class while the Uber is going. You prefer your heavy to be really active in the post Uber, not dying to the Uber. And being able to pull out the Fist of Steel is going to make it much easier for you to get to spawn more reliably, which I don't see as a particularly broken aspect of the unlock, to be honest. And maybe you could run to point and try. I don't know. I don't see how these are broken. But to be fair, if they were included or not wouldn't really change things too much. Yeah, I don't know. There's just not much discussion about these things. I think in Highlander, I don't know. Let me actually check Highlander. I could see it being banned in Highlander. No, it's not even. Yeah, I don't know. On to Engineer. So Engineer has a couple of banned weapons. So Rescue Ranger is banned. And I actually had an interesting discussion about this last night because On one hand, I don't think the Rescue Ranger is broken or overpowered. On the other hand, I was making the argument that it makes your decision-making on Engineer less interesting. Because typically in a disadd last situation, you are, as an engineer, you are tasked with a decision. So of course you're going to want the disadd gun up. It's usually going to be near your spawn. But whether you tank it with your wrench or not is a decision you have to make, and there is risk reward associated with that. So of course the best way to take out a gun is by bursting it so that an engineer couldn't even tank it if they tried. But not everyone does, and some demos will just try and like single dead it down, or they don't sync their damage properly. And an engineer, if they're taking that risk of being next to the gun tanking it, because keep in mind, you do not under any circumstances want to die on engineer in sixes, pretty much ever. So being next to the gun, you can take damage and you can die if you try to tank it and eat a ton of damage. So there is some risk associated with that, but it can be very rewarding, because if your gun survives the Uber, then you're probably just winning the push. If your gun survives the Uber while trying to take it out, then you pretty much just hold, which is really valuable. But there's some risk reward associated with that, and you might be better off just kind of playing it safe, letting the gun going down and switching off to heavy faster. Rescue Ranger does remove that decision-making process, because now you can kind of do both. Now, of course, it heals the gun much less effectively than the wrench, but you kind of get to do half of each, where you get to tank the gun and you get to be playing by spawn to switch off while doing so. And there isn't too much decision-making process there. Now, the point that was raised that I kind of agree with, actually, is that it kind of just presents a new decision, because you can either tank the gun with the Rescue Ranger or tank it with your wrench, which is more effective. So there is still some risk reward element. I definitely think if the Rescue Ranger were included, it would just be the weapon that engineers use on disadd last. On evens last, maybe even still, just because it makes your life more convenient. But it would reduce your ability to clear stickies, which is an important aspect of using the stock shotgun or Frontier Justice, because clearing carpets and whatnot is valuable for letting your demo properly spam lobby in the case of like process last, or like spam top left in the case of sunshine last and stuff like that. There's actually utility there, but I still think Rescue Ranger would be pretty used. It definitely makes holding last a little bit easier, not a ton. But I think if demos actually got proper about taking out guns, then it would be definitely less used. Now, the picking up the gun aspect of it, I don't know about that, because you could make the case that you could have like a corner gun if you have a lot of time to move a disadd gun somewhere, and you can waste a lot of the time in the Uber, make it turn around, pick it up, try and put it down elsewhere. I don't think it would be particularly effective, to be honest, because the gun is likely going to get spammed down. I mean, I can think of teams that would try to move a gun just by picking it up with the wrench, because it's outside spawn, and move it. It didn't turn out that effective. I don't think that's a strong strategy, so I don't think that's a major consideration of the Rescue Ranger. So yeah, overall, I don't think it's a particularly broken unlock or anything. It does swap out some risk reward factors for others, and yeah, I don't know if it'd be too broken if it was unbanned. Oh, I should mention, Rescue Ranger was one of the weapons that was tested in that cup. And this was, yeah, so a lot of my opinions were informed by people who played in that cup. Short circuit. Is short circuit annoying? No. Or short circuit annoying. Is short circuit broken? No. Would short circuit make engineer viable outside of last? Also no. Is short circuit one of the worst designed weapons in the entire game? Yeah, in my opinion. What I hate about the short circuit is that it is kind of just a negation factor. I really don't like negation mechanics in TF2 at all, really. And so that applies to a lot of things. That applies to not afterburn, air blast. I don't like how it negates projectiles. Because I like the nuance of actual like play counterplay mechanics, which I think are generally very well done in TF2, where, you know, you play your movement for your defensive capabilities and being able to mitigate damage by dodging shots, even partially dodging shots to reduce the damage you take is still a valuable asset. And stuff like that just makes for interesting gameplay. And other things that just kind of negate one thing or the other is kind of uninteresting and boring. Like Darwin's Danger Shield, Razorback, those are both just very uninteresting weapons. Yeah, so I don't really like negation mechanics, and Short Circuit is a prime example of those. So I'm just not a fan of it as a weapon, but it wouldn't be too strong. I will say one thing that it would be actually pretty good at, and actually one of the reasons why the Quickie Bomb Launcher is banned in Europe, is that it would be a premier option for pushing last with AD. Because you can immediately clear the point of sticks. And unlike the case of the Quickie Bomb Launcher, where you can still get bombed on point and killed while capping, you could just be erasing the rockets of the soldiers bombing you. That's like kind of crazy. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Short Circuit were unbanned, if people tried to, instead of what you see sometimes with a player spawning up heavy to push into last with, someone spawned up engineer to push into last with. And engineer's a much faster, well, actually, heavies usually use gloves of running urgently to get to last. So Engie might still end up being slower, but still, like, if you have the time, the spawn timer, to get to last by the time your team's trying to take that push, then yeah, it could be legitimately extremely powerful in pushing into last. But overall, I think I'm fine with Short Circuit being banned. It's a very annoying weapon to play against. And yeah, there's a couple of, arguably broken situations, i.e. pushing last. Now again, would Short Circuit make NG viable outside of last? In the case of pushing into last, yes, but as a full-time class, still, no, it would not. Because overall, I do think it is still a weak weapon, all things considered. On to the Wrangler, and this might be the one single example of a weapon that could make an off-class viable full-time. And there's definitely big asterisk on that could, because I'm really not sure. So is the Wrangler banned because people don't want to play against wrangled mini sentries? No, it is not. The Wrangler is not banned because people want Engineer to be stuck on last whatsoever. It is banned because it makes Engineer on last way too strong. So I just want to be clear about that, because again, the Wrangler's capacity to absolutely tank a sentry gun is insanely strong. And this is something that basically every format is familiar with. And casual players as well really want this thing to be changed, because it is just so insanely strong at tanking a gun. And again, there is a delicate, well, maybe delicate is the right word, but there is definitely a balance to pushing last with AD. And honestly, Wrangler would be really strong for holding last on evens for that matter. But particularly for pushing last with AD. Like the amount of walls that an Uber has to go through, being like a sentry gun and a heavy and, all these buffed players with resupplies. They still have the advantage pushing with AD, but the Wrangler would definitely throw things out of balance. You would have to dedicate your entire Uber to taking out the gun, and it would just be so miserable and would make holding last way easier, would make games way lower scoring. And yeah, it just overall would be just unfun to play with. So unfortunate that the Wrangler is banned, in the sense that maybe you could see some Engineer outside of last if this thing were allowed. You could maybe have a wrangled mini Engineer be viable full time. I have no idea. I still think the slowness of the class is a major weakness that is holding it back. So even then, maybe still not. But the reason it's banned is not because people don't want players playing Engineer outside of last. It's that it makes the Engineer on last just so much less balanced and so much more difficult to deal with, which really throws out of whack the dynamics of a last push and a last hold in order to favor the defenders way too much. Okay, on to Medic. So Medic has a couple of Mediguns banned, that being the Quick Fix. So faster heal rate, faster Uber charge rate, less max overheal. and it replaces your Uber with a quick fix Uber, which basically just does a bunch of healing to you and your heal target. Why don't people like the quick fix, or why is it banned? And there are a few reasons for this. So for starters, it kind of throws Ubers out of whack a little bit because it does charge faster. And this was a major pain point for a long time. It also makes it so that add and disad kind of don't matter so much, because the kind of hidden aspect, well, not really hidden, but it's not really in text or anything. The fact that you can effectively rocket jump as a medic means medics can't really be caught in the same way on disad or something like that, which there is a lot of interest to the dynamics of disad and how you position, because there are trade-offs with how close you hold, because the closer you hold, the harder it is for another team to get through. And in some cases, if you hold close enough and spam really hard, then another team that was trying to dry push with their Uber ad without using their Uber, they might lose a player or lose multiple players, and suddenly now you get to pressure into the other team, even though they have ad, because they didn't understand how close you were, and instead of calling their Uber and trying to catch you with the Uber, they ended up losing players. But likewise, if you're holding too close, now of course you are vulnerable to them using that Uber, and as a result, there is a risk-reward decision-making process to where you stand on disad and how hard you want to spam, because of course the better spam you get, the more vulnerable you are to an Uber, and the more passive you are, the safer you are. But of course, the spam is going to be worse, so it's easier for them to push. So yeah, just all the dynamics of a team popping through into the next point versus trying to dry push, and the positioning and all that is quite interesting. But quick fix kind of takes all that and just throws it out. Quick fix Ubers are of course worse than Medigun Ubers, because just healing really quickly is worse than being invincible. But it's not that much worse, because the damage output of as few as 5 players, because there's only 5 combat players. Quick fix is going to be able to heal past a lot of that. Just going to die to traps and good focus fire, but still, it is comparable with a lot of aspects that kind of just muddy the state of Ubers in the game. And the balance of Ubers is kind of the centralizing force of the entire metagame, and is something that pretty much everyone enjoys playing around. It makes the game really fun. It makes the game really interesting how, all your decision-making processes, your positioning, your target selection, whether you're trying to push or hold or do whatever, all center around Ubers. On to the Vaccinator. So Vaccinator, I don't really know if it's broken full time, because it does heal much slower. And I don't think the bubbles are that great. Definitely strong, and definitely will help you win team fights, being able to pop bubbles while the other team is just building an Uber. So maybe in some sense it could be broken there. But I think the real thing the real area where it's just stupid is in last holds, because let's imagine a situation that's a push or a mid to last type of situation, right? So it's not uncommon for a mid to last situation to come up, which is where a team on a mid fight not only kills the other team's medic, but their own medic survives, and they have enough gas in the tank to push 2 as well before the other team can set up there. And then you're presented with a situation in which off of the mid fight, you now have add into last. Pretty common kind of game state. And in a case like this, even if the Vaccinator weren't good for just general team fights, and that medic was running Medigun to mid, on last, your options are either you spawn up Medigun or crits or whatever, and then you won't have an Uber by the time they push, or you spawn up Vaccinator, and now you have 2 or 3 Vaccinator bubbles to pop during that hold. So there's really no reason not to switch to this thing in a disad situation. And then it just makes holding last way easier, which again, you can kind of see a trend here that making holding last really easy is something that Sixes players just aren't a fan of, because they prefer that whether a round is scored or not is more so to the execution of the Uber than, you know, having to just get through, you know, 4 different insanely broken defensive options. Because like, can you imagine trying to be, if Wrangler, Natasha, Vaccinator were all allowed, pushing last with add might be literally impossible unless it was like a miracle. So yeah, there's definitely some balance to be sought out. And, you know, the game is faster paced and more interesting when pushing last is strong. And also, for that matter, holding last is more rewarding when it's a lower percentage play, because then you really feel like your defensive backbone and everyone contributing to the fight properly was able to win. And that can be rewarding in and of itself, even though it's a harder thing to do. So yeah, that's the primary reason why Vaccinator is not allowed. Now on to Sniper. So Sniper actually kind of has scout syndrome in the sense that it's just a really, really strong class for the situations that it's used. So most of these unlocks are kind of just to make it a little less strong than it is. So for starters, the Machina, pretty straightforward. It just kind of does more damage and it can penetrate players. And yeah, it doesn't functionally change what Sniper does. It doesn't functionally change how Sniper would be played. You would still use a Machina Sniper in the exact same ways that you would use a regular Sniper, but it just kind of gives Sniper more reward for, you know, no downside whatsoever. Because the tracers are not a downside in a coordinated team setting where people are going to be able to know where that Sniper's at. And usually that Sniper is spotted just moments before they shoot anyway. And not being able to fire while zoomed really doesn't matter that much at all. So it just gives the potential for completely random penetration kills and extra damage for no reason. And people don't want that on as strong a class as Sniper. Similar thing to the Sydney Sleeper, just faster charge rate. All you need is a full charge body shot to one-shot any medic, because of course medics cannot be overhealed as there's only one of them. So you just get that full charge faster, on top of the fact that even though it doesn't crit on headshot, so in the cases where you might kill someone with a crit headshot, such as headshotting a soldier getting through a choke point is a common, you know, Sniper kill, or killing a soldier, headshotting a soldier into last or something like that. Still, doing 150 damage to them and Jarateing them for multiple seconds is pretty close to killing them, especially in the case of like a soldier trying to make space through choke. That guy's probably just going to die. I mean, Jarate not only makes them take extra damage, but no damage fall off, meaning, you know, even just a wayward splash rocket that would be doing 30 damage is now doing like 90 and he's dead. Plus, I mean, you mini crit on charge headshots, so a lot of the time these players are dying anyway because it's a mini crit and you don't need the full crit to kill them, which applies to medic for that matter as well. So you don't need a full charge to kill a medic. So basically it just makes Sniper a bit more effective at what he does, and people don't like that because they don't like Sniper being stronger for no downsides. Because again, the no headshots is a downside, to be clear. But for what Sniper's niche is not actually that relevant. And no random crits. No snipers have random crits. That makes no sense. Huntsman, I guess, has random crits. But yeah, no, all the sniper rifles, they don't have random crits. So I don't know why that's even a stat. Weird. Jarate. Jarate is, again, more so banned because Sniper's really strong and it's just another tool for Sniper to have. Again, Jarate would not make Sniper a full-time viable class, I don't think, because there's still glaring weaknesses to Sniper. His mobility, his survivability, for that matter, if a player actually gets on them, namely a soldier or even a scout for that matter. And the Jarate doesn't fix any of these. But what a Jarate does do is make it so that if a soldier bombs and kills a Sniper, then it's almost always going to be just a trade, because that soldier is now Jarated for however long that is, which is a very long time and very easy to clean up, chip down from long range, because again, it's mini crits without fall off. And yeah, it just makes Sniper better, and it makes dealing with a Sniper worse, because instead of being able to just kill the guy, a lot of the time you're just trading out. And again, Sniper is a very strong class, and generally competitive players don't want to just give this strong class more tools that make it harder to deal with for no reason whatsoever. And we are on to the last weapon, which is the Diamondback. And casual people really hate this thing. I don't see the major problem with the Diamondback because most of the time that a spy gets a stab, they immediately die anyway. And I think that if you are able to secure a stab and survive, then it's really not a big deal to get rewarded for that. I do think the revolver is a very consistently strong option because it does deal surprising amounts of damage. And I think L'Étranger is also really good and lets you pick your timings, and it gives you a wider array of plays you can make as spy, because usually what plays you get to make are pretty limited by the amount of cloak you have, which, as an aside, is part of the reason why I do like the Inviswatch situationally. But yeah, I don't see Diamondback as particularly strong. Now, of course, for a similar reason that this weapon is so hated in casual, some competitive players don't like it, in that it just feels like undue reward for just something so simple. Because you could theoretically, as a spy, backstab like a flank member who's not really that important, but more importantly, not expecting to get stabbed and not really, on spy watch duty like a medic or a combat or a combo class is, and then use that crit later to try and snipe the med or what have you. So there could be like just kind of some dumbness that it introduces, but I really don't think that it's like particularly strong or broken or anything, because again, most of the time that a spy gets a stab, he immediately dies afterwards. But that is it for every weapon. And yeah, like most of the weapons banned most of the weapons banned to prevent classes from just being really strong are either on sixes classes like Scout or Soldier, in the case of like Reserve Shooter, Base Jumper, and then all of Scout's secondaries pretty much, or they're banned to prevent classes from being really strong in the exact same roles they're already used in, right? So yeah, some of you might be surprised by how few weapons are banned. And now, of course, North America has fewer weapons banned than Europe. But if you're going to make the argument that, these weapons are banned in order to prevent these classes from being seen more in more variety of ways, then that argument wouldn't hold up for any of the bans in Europe either, because, let's say, for example, the detonator, which is banned in Europe, I found out actually quite recently. It's allowed in North America, and Pyro's not seen any more here than it is there. So I think that's evidence against that. But yeah, with maybe the sole exception of the Wrangler, pretty much all these weapons are banned for completely different reasons, and not as many believe to prevent these classes from being seen more. I feel like I reiterate this point too much, but again, just to be clear, like, the reason that Heavy or Engineer or Pyro are primarily seen on last is because that is where they excel at over Scout, primarily Scout, because Soldiers are still typically not off-classing on last. And outside of last, yeah, Scout just tends to provide more consistent value. That is not us deciding that and choosing to uphold that because we just think it's fun, although some decisions here were made with consideration to fun, such as like flying Guillotine, for example. Maybe you could make the case of Natasha. But yeah, by and large, it's literally just the way Valve designed the game, that these classes tend to be better in more general settings than other classes that tend to be better in more special settings. And obviously the playtime is going to reflect that. So it's not that Sixes players necessarily hate these classes or anything. It's just a matter of what is effective and what is not in more general game states, and what's exploitable as well. Because again, to reiterate what I've said in multiple videos before, it's not that it's not that Pyro is bad necessarily, and the class has some interesting utility. Like on a mid fight, for instance, a Pyro does present an issue for a team in the sense that with Detonator Afterburn spam, you are presenting a problem for the long-term sustainability of a team's health with just constant ticking afterburn. It does add up. And you're also presenting a problem for a fast-paced mid, because if they're trying to bomb quickly in order to not have to deal with a bunch of afterburn, then you can just be reflecting their rockets and making their bombs useless. So something like that does provide some utility, but it's not that people are like blind to that or that that's not a consideration. It is simply that like people who try this, and it has been tried and continues to be played, don't get me wrong, like there's some pyro enjoyers out there. It's just generally less effective because the class is severely limited by range, mobility, and whatnot, and also matchup for that matter. Just eaten by scouts, demos, and yeah, that's just makes it less effective. So it's not that Sixes players just hate these classes and hate these weapons because they make the classes more viable full time. It's more so that they make the classes too strong at the niches they're already doing and already would do, and yeah, for stuff outside of that, it's more so just these classes are just less effective by the design of the game and by the design of Valve. So anyway, hopefully that was a nice informative kind of thing about these weapon unlocks. Because again, a lot of these classes don't have many banned weapons, like 1 on Spy, 0 on Pyro. Sniper has a few, but Sniper's strong. NG has a few, but NG's very strong. But yeah. Interesting stuff, and whitelist discussion just continues to this day. Obviously, people are always talking about weapons to unban, weapons to ban. It's an ongoing process because, again, the metagame shifts. People use different things, different strats come up and go, and yeah. So anyway, that's probably all I have to talk about the topic. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.